Welcome to the Sojourn Wealth Management Podcast. My name is Jeff Bronner, and I'm here with my co-host, Corey Akins and Andrew Kraft. How are y'all doing?
Doing well. Outside of the Vols losing to Houston, in the Elite Eight.
That was painful.
That was painful. But outside of that, doing well. Ready for warm weather, baseball season now.
That's right. Turn from the hardcore to the diamond. Spring has sprung, right? We had a great camping trip last week at Rock Island State Park.
Yeah.
Beautiful waterfalls. You all should check it out. And then last weekend up in Gatlinburg at a soccer tournament. A lot of fun. God's creation is so beautiful this time of year.
Amen.
Yeah.
We got to spend
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we got to spend a day at the zoo last weekend where Thomas's third birthday. And you're right, spring has sprung. We've had some beautiful weather the last week or so. It's a little rainy now, but I've heard it said that April showers bring May flowers. So I'm glad to see it.
Did Thomas have a favorite animal?
He loves, maybe it's because of the way they lay out the zoo, but the otters, right there when you walk into, they're right there. They're always super active. So he gets super excited about those. But when we got there, the tiger had just woken up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy because we walked in, we're at the tiger exhibit. He walks out and just does this like guttural growl. It was so intimidating. So that was a cool experience. He still does. Thomas will be like, "Raw!" He'll try to imitate it. It's the cutest thing ever. But yeah, so we've been enjoying the spring weather as well, and looking forward to baseball season as basketball wraps up.
Hey, it was a good year though, right? It's hard because you want it to go on and you want it to continue, but at a certain point, you just realize everybody's season ends like that, and only one team gets to win the national championship, and you just got to enjoy it for what it was. And so
it's good to have a coach that elevates his players' skills as well as, I think, focuses on character.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Speaking of coaching, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about the value of an advisor. We're going to unpack some data, both qualitative and quantitative, as well as look at some research that Andrew himself has done on how we apply this in our firm with financial wellness. So we're going to look at those things, and I'm really excited for this discussion.
Yeah, Jeff, it's a topic that I think is dear to all of our hearts, and it's a fun topic because it really gets at the heart of the advisor-client relationship and how the financial planner provides expertise and all those things. So I'd like to start just with Dalbar, and they've done a study since 1994 regarding performance and that gap between investors and the returns on their investments. And so just in that study, they've looked over the last 30 years at average annualized returns, and the average investor has done about 8%, while the S&P 500 has done just over 10%. So about a 2% difference there. And in real dollars, they just said, if you had $100,000 and you started in 1994 through 2023, you would be at about a $800,000 difference just on kind of the average S&P 500 index fund versus the average investor. And so that disparity has not only been studied by Dalbar, but also Vanguard, Morningstar, Russell Investments, and then also Carl Richards, the author Carl Richards.
It's incredible, just some of those numbers you're pointing out right there. And it seems evident that throughout all of these studies, this is a uniform phenomenon. Do any of the studies talk about why that is, or can you give some insight into why?
Yeah, that's what Carl Richards attempts to answer in his book, The Behavior Gap. And so the main thing that he's trying to address there is why the average investor returns so much less than the average investment. And basically, he boils it down to the emotional decision-making has a negative impact on returns. So the average investment might deliver solid returns over time, but the average investor often underperforms because they are buying and selling at inopportune moments. So think about this. When the market's going down, you're typically going to field phone calls that are, the market's going down, I want to get out. Right. Or if the market's going up, I want to be, in that euphoria, like I want to chase that market up, right? And so what typically happens is investors buy at the wrong time. So they buy when the market's high and they sell when the market's low. And that's just opposite of what we're supposed to, right? To do.
Yeah, and part of that study shows the inflows and outflows of the investments. And so they can see when the market's going down, a lot of money's coming out. And when it goes back up, like you said, I'm excited. I want to get in the market. And it's kind of like they've, sold low and bought high.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So what you guys are saying is that because of those emotional reactions to whatever market cycle any given investor is in, they're leaving money on the table. And that's what Dalbar's illustrating with that study you pointed out a second ago, that over that 30-year span or what have you, there was a significant gap between what an investment returns versus what the average investor returns. So you're saying that money's left on the table by the average investor because of those emotional reactions, correct?
Absolutely. Yes. So, and that is where the value, and this episode's titled The Value of an Advisor, that's where that value component comes in. Because basically individuals make more informed and rational decisions when they're working with somebody. So in times of market volatility, we try to act as a steadying influence to reinforce clients' long-term objectives and remind them about the strategic intent behind the investment plan. So the why behind what we're doing. And so that guidance we've recognized too acts as a critical safeguard in helping prevent some of those emotionally driven decisions in the times of uncertainty. And that's why I think it's important to have kind of that game plan there as well.
Right. And a real financial advisor is going to remind you of that game plan. And when an emotional decision comes up, they're going to tell you that's not in your best interest based on where you're wanting to go.
Yes.
This is an emotional reaction. We need to stay the course.
Yeah. The coaching component of it is vital. I mean, being able to have an honest dialogue about what you need to do or not do, it's absolutely crucial. And you mentioned something about the how. Talk a little bit about the how, Jeff, of how we would do some of those things.
Right. In conversations that we've had about how should we operate as advisors and what is it that we bring to the table for clients, there's really three primary things functionally that we would articulate. The first would be expertise. The second is implementation. And then the third would be monitoring. So when we talk about expertise, we're discussing everything from understanding the financial world, investment products, different mutual fund, ETF managers, and the difference between a 401k, 403b, or a defined benefit plan. All of those kind of high level things that are good introductory knowledge to have initially. That's foundational. And then having all of that expertise allows us to take any given situation and be able to diagram it, talk to clients, help them understand and discuss, what it is that they have. So having a knowledge base is pivotal in being a value to a client.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of the areas that we work in, and that's K-12 education. So in the state of Tennessee, if you're part of the TCRS pension plan, there's a big difference if you're working, or if you were hired, before 2014 versus after July of 2014. And that difference can be a 15% decrease in pension benefit depending on just when you're hired. And so if you are a teacher and it's just something that is not been on your radar, right? Like you just kind of went to the orientation and they talked about retirement, but without having somebody with expertise being able to show you this is the difference in dollars over time, you wouldn't even know what you've got to make up or how much income you need to have in retirement. And so that's just an example that comes to mind when you're talking about expertise and how that can have a long-lasting impact.
Yeah, and that also is true in the higher education area, another kind of segment that we focus on. The TCRS, like you mentioned, the difference, but also some folks have the choice between TCRS or the optional retirement plan.
Yeah.
And so knowing what they would prefer, whether it's flexibility and some assets to lead, create an estate, whatever they might desire going forward, or they prefer a paycheck, more like, Social Security. Like it kind of depends on what their goals are, then how they might choose this decision that is pretty much irrevocable. Like I
Yeah.
said, 5 years later they can make a switch, but just understanding all the differences and effects that choice has is important.
Yeah, and timing too, right? So it's going to be different kind of career stage. So like there's a lot of different factors, especially in higher education, because even the pension plan in higher education is different based on years, right? So there's a lot of moving pieces there.
Yeah, expertise is so important.
Yeah, and what you guys are getting at even is beyond kind of the general expertise I was articulating initially. Each individual is going to have workplace benefits that are going to vary, and TCRS is a great example because you can say TCRS and mean 20 different things. And even just in the K-12 space, Andrew, you're talking about the higher ed space, but each school district is going to have different benefits, different retirement benefits, and are going to navigate things a little bit differently than neighboring school districts. And so having a comprehensive understanding of all of those things are pivotal. And it really is the bedrock for implementation. So if you understand how these different benefits work and you have a general understanding of how to create financial plans, then the question is, can you put them into action? Can you help lead somebody into taking action in order to accomplish whatever goals they might have? So taking the example you were talking about a second ago, Corey, with the difference between somebody hired on this date and how that can have a dramatic impact on their retirement benefits in 30 years. Well, that's going to have a big impact on what we do today. So taking all of that knowledge and understanding and then putting it to action is a big part of what advisors do as well, helping clients feel comfortable and feel confident about taking that next step.
Yeah, it's not enough to just, here's the data, right? Here's all the information. Now, good luck. The thing that makes a good financial advisor a good one is distilling that data down and then helping our clients to implement it in a way that is not, one, overwhelming, but two, is going to align with the goals and the dreams and the desires that they have.
Right. And that's where kind of expertise builds into implementation, and that culminates in monitoring.
Yeah.
When a plan is put in place, we want to make sure it is achieving and is moving towards those goals, dreams, and desires that you're talking about. And one of the ways in which I'll tie this into what we've been discussing with the behavioral elements and the emotional elements is Paige and I are big DIYers. We love building, creating, crafting things. And right now, what we're working on is a fence for our garden. So in order to do this project, you have to have some base level understanding of how to operate a drill, how to, dig a post hole, how to make sure that everything's level and whatnot. And by the end of the project, ideally, and it's on track to do so, there'll be a decent looking fence in the yard for our garden, keeping rabbits out. If I were to escalate the scale of that illustration to say we're not just talking about building a fence for our garden, now we're talking about building a home that's going to provide shelter for us for the next 20 years. And I take the level of expertise that I have and I apply it to that scenario. The first time a tornado warning comes to our neighborhood, I'm going to have some anxiety because I'm going to start to question whether or not I really knew how to build the foundation, dig it deep enough, and make sure all of the necessary support structures were properly fortified. And you don't want that because I don't want to question whether or not the walls are going to collapse on my family at this moment of volatility. And that's where the monitoring phase, there's going to be different storms, theoretically or metaphorically speaking, storms, market volatility. There's going to be instances that cause circumstantial stress towards a financial portfolio, a financial plan. And what you don't want to do is have the exact reaction you're talking about earlier of fear or euphoria that's going to end up sabotaging that plan. So what a financial advisor does is after the plan's implemented, they go back and they continue talking and meeting with the client to ensure that they feel comfortable and confident with how the plan is progressing and providing advisable recommendations for if we need to make correction, if the goals have changed, how do we need to do that in the most strategically wise method possible?
Yeah. And in that example too, like your fence, if you get that wrong, well, you can just tear it down and put it back up, right?
That's right.
With a house, you cannot do that. At least I don't think you can. I'm not a contractor.
Not without great cost.
Yeah. So it's a good example because most of the time you're only going to build a house once.
Mm-hmm.
And with retirement planning, it's the same thing. You only pretty much get one shot at going through this life and retiring. And so I've heard it kind of described as an engine. When you're in your working years, you're kind of adding to that engine. And each year you're kind of putting more, and I'm not a mechanical guy, so please forgive my ignorance on the that front, but you're adding to that engine, your pistons and all those things. And then on day one of retirement, that is supposed to take you and carry you through what could be 10, 20, 30, 40 years of post-working years. And so it's just vital. And again, it's important, and you don't want to have those moments of volatility that strike fear and make you make bad decisions.
And there's been a number of instances where, talking to clients and having that conversation with clients, helping them realize, hey, this is a better way to go about that. There's been a number of instances with clients that we've had where behavioral coaching has been a dramatic conduit towards them achieving goals that they wouldn't even have thought would have been possible for them.
It reminds me of, we have a client who worked at UT for a long time that Andrew met on they call him EOD, Employee Orientation Day, right?
Employee and Organizational Development, lunch and learn.
Nailed it. That Andrew met at an EOD day. And she had been through a lot in her life and did not think she was going to be able to retire at all, let alone with dignity. So Andrew introduced himself after the day. She was leaving and she said, "You can't help me." And Andrew said, "Well, let me see what I can do." And he went over to her office. They met. He showcased his expertise in that he understood everything there was to understand about the University of Tennessee retirement plan and her specific situation. He helped her implement a game plan that would get her on the right path. And then every single year, he monitored that until one day he looked up and he said, "You can retire." And she wasn't just able to retire. She was able to retire with dignity. And that's just one of many stories that we have as a firm that I think shine a light on what this topic is. And that is, like, we want to help people and we want people to be able to efficiently and effectively do those things.
Absolutely.
And it just reminds me that the behavioral coaching side of things is not always, hey, let's not make this extreme decision now to liquidate half of our portfolio because the market's going down.
Right.
Or let's go buy this particular stock because, there's this huge trend and everybody's excited about it. But sometimes it's as simple as start saving. We need to take action. We need to get started. How can we do that today to build a habit and to coach, like you were saying earlier, Andrew, coach the client up into pursuing greater and greater financial wellness and to ultimately achieve their goals.
And one example of that is think about we were talking about K-12 education earlier. Think about a third grade teacher who's 30 years old, has been teaching for 4 or 5 years and is just kind of in the throes of life, right? I'm 31 and, it's busy this time of year, right? Or in this season of life. And the retirement planning may just not even be something that's on the radar with all of those other items that are important. And so the advisor who comes in at like an EOD day, like what Andrew was talking about, is so important when they sit down with that person and they say, "Hey, you have $250 within your budget that you can save towards retirement." And then the next year they're helping them give their retired selves a pay raise. So then they go from 250 to 275 and 300 the next year and so forth and so on. That it's an unquantifiable amount of value that the advisor has given just because they said, hey, you can save and you should save. Let's do it. They're going to look up one day and have a pretty large sum of money just from that kind of that behavioral coaching that you're talking about.
And often that first step on this journey begins because they had an interaction with an advisor who met with them and helped them and encouraged them and to get started saving. And then if you kind of, follow that out through into retirement, that's where, an advisor can also help increase that level of comfort when you're spending money. You spend this entire life in the accumulation phase, they call it, and then you switch to retirement, and now you're supposed to, in the distribution phase, you're supposed to spend the money that you spent all these decades saving. And sometimes it can be a little bit disconcerting. And so working with an advisor to help make sure that you're on a sustainable path, and then you're able to, with a high level of comfort and peace, be able to whether it's, give away or spend money on loved ones and fun experiences, whether that's a cruise down the river or some clients are trying to visit every baseball stadium and, sending pictures back.
Yeah.
Those kind of fun things
Mm-hmm.
are neat to see.
Yeah.
So there's an element of reassurance that comes with working with an advisor, whether it be helping to encourage, hey, yeah, you can start saving.
Yeah.
And to your point, Andrew, yeah, you can start spending.
That's exactly right.
You can feel good about doing that. I do want to talk about some of the numbers behind a lot of the different qualitative things we've been discussing. Corey, do you mind unpacking? You already touched on the Dalbar study, maybe going more into that or some of the other studies that you've looked into. Do you mind looking at some of those numbers with us?
The fun stuff.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
So there are no shortage of studies that have been done on this topic. I mentioned Morningstar, Russell Investments, Vanguard. They've all done studies. There's a particular article written by an author at Smart Asset who she did a lot of analysis. And I won't go into all the details of it, but basically she came away with a very similar number as the Dalbar study, and we'll talk about a Vanguard study here shortly. But she basically said that working with an advisor, you're going to have about 2.5% annual rate of return that's better over a long period of time than not working with one. So the self-managed portfolio is going to be is going to perform less over time. Vanguard has a similar study. They looked at $500,000 hypothetical investment over a 25-year period. The person who was self-managed performed right at 5%. The portfolio that was advisor managed was 8%. So a little bit higher than that 2.5%, but in that same neighborhood. A couple of other interesting facts. I think, 95% of those with a financial advisor think it's worth the money. So a majority of folks who are working with somebody are pleased that they're working with somebody. And then Journal of Retirement suggests that most people who work with an advisor feel at ease about their finances and could end up with about 15% more money to spend in retirement. And I think that's backed up by what the famous Nobel Prize winning economist Robert Shiller said: people make better decisions with financial advisors. So that behavioral component feeds into the actual tangible evidence.
Those numbers speak for themselves as far as the help that an advisor provides. I want to also, Andrew, you've done a lot of research on financial wellness in your master's thesis. Do you mind unpacking how you've taken some of the research that you've done there, how it connects to some of these elements we've been discussing, and then how we've implemented that into our firm?
Yeah. So when I was working on my master's in financial planning, there had already been done all this research that Corey was unpacking about this investment difference. And so there was this number that an advisor can help individual investors typically gain more than they would on their own. But I wanted to really expand that to include a lot of other aspects. So I created, first of all, some principles of financial wellness. So basically having a plan to give, save, and spend, to not be burdened with a lot of debt, to not make emotional decisions, which we talked about earlier. And so from those, I created a metric that we just called financial wellness. And so it looked at kind of a broad range of categories. So, emergency funds, how you handle your debt, life insurance, managing risk, planning for retirement. Have you started? Are you putting in just the minimum to get a match, or are you actually saving more for your retired self each year? Kind of a thing. How are your investments allocated? Are they in just a kind of a target default fund, or are they something that's more specific to your own individual goals? Are they allocated efficiently and diversified? So all these kind of things we try to cover. And also we don't give tax or legal advice, but we wanted to kind of make sure that beneficiary audits were being done, that you were saving in the most tax efficient way possible. And so we began kind of surveying folks who are either our own clients, and then also new folks at the employee orientation, the new hire orientation and benefit fairs, things like that. And we put them in basically two categories, whether they had worked with an advisor or not. And the definition of an advisor was very loose. We didn't want to kind of alienate any folks, so we added certified financial planner professionals, CPAs, life insurance agents, advisors, kind of in any kind of form, whether they had crossed paths with them and sought counsel and guidance, or absolutely nothing. And by and large, that financial wellness score was much higher for those that had worked with an advisor at some point in their life than those that hadn't. Again, kind of scoring across all those different metrics. And so we still try and cover those as we're doing our progress review meetings, the kind of monitoring, Jeff, that you were talking about earlier, and just kind of circle back to those to help make sure that our clients are increasing that number, so they have a great sense of financial wellness now, because we know that lays the foundation to have a secure retirement later on.
And so when you talk about those different advisors that have these relationships and how that adds to financial wellness, the overall metric and the different things that are being measured there, the fruit of that we've discussed is that, and we've touched on this a couple of times even in this podcast, but the fruit of that is these folks have peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sense of security that comes with working with someone who can provide a game plan and coach you through it. And I think that with all of the studies, all the data, and all of those different components, that is what we might boil down to as the value of an advisor.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the definition being broad, right? So insurance agent to CFP to everybody in the middle, it reminds me that getting your goals down on paper is something that is valuable, something that the people who did plan, even if it wasn't very much, or even if it was just kind of basic planning, that still had a tangible effect, more so than the folks that didn't. And I think you can't express how important that is enough.
Yeah, it's kind of changing that dream to a plan.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of getting it down and having that objective second opinion, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a really good conversation, and I appreciate your guys' work, Andrew, with your master's theses and kind of helping us implement that into our firm, and Corey, every piece of research that you brought to the table. It's been very fruitful.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to further discussions. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sojourn Wealth Management Podcast. This is a friendly reminder that all content in this podcast is intended for educational purposes alone. Nothing in this episode should be treated as tax, legal, or investment advice. We encourage you to consult your financial professional for any of these needs.